Okay, I made this video in 2014, 6 years ago, when I owned two CrossFit gyms. I was doing quite a bit of Olympic weightlifting coaching, and one of my friends, we were having a discussion about arm bend because he's tall. He was over 6 feet tall, and he had long arms and a short torso, which is the worst proportions for Olympic weightlifting. It makes it difficult to get it into the hip crease on the power position. Okay, and and apparently, because I put Rich Froning in this title, every once in a while it gets a hit. I get a comment about elbow bend, and there's a lot of confusion. So I'm going to try to clear up some of the confusion, because elbow bend generally is an error. It is, generally speaking. It's a good general rule. Do not bend the elbows till you finish the second pull, until you're on your way down under the bar. Okay. If the elbows bend, power ends. That's a good rule to live by. Okay, so when the elbow bend is acceptable is under two conditions, really. One, it does not cause a deviation in the bar path. Okay, a bar path should relatively go straight up and down. All right. After it passes the knees, it's going to deviate slightly inward towards the hips. Then it's going to deviate slightly outward around the chest, and then it's going to candy cane on top. All right, but overall, it's a very straight path, and it should always be somewhere between your shins and the toes. It should never go outside those parameters. Uh, and all the technique involved in weightlifting is to create that bar path, essentially. With a correct bar path, you'll be creating more torque and more power. All right, so if you're leaning very far forward and you're actively pulling that bar into your hips, essentially keep yourself from falling over, that's bad. Your bar path is jacked up. Okay, now if you go and you pull early, like when it hits mid thigh, that's when people usually pull early, is right when it hits mid thigh, and then they literally pick the bar up beyond the hips before you finish the hip extension. If the bar is higher than the hips before you finish the hip extension, that's an error. Okay, that's when the elbow bend is bad. Okay, and those two scenarios is when you'll create a bad bar path. All right, so that's why in a broad category, there's two scenarios where the arm bend is bad. It creates a bad bar path. Okay, and number two, they act like shock absorbers. So if you watch Froning in this video, he, as pronounced as his arm bend is, because he's pushing the limits on that 10 to 15 degree limit border, okay, on his arms. So if I draw a straight line here, it's very pronounced. His elbow is way off of the straight line. There should be a straight line between the shoulder, elbow, and wrist. It's not even close. However, if you watch him carefully, when he hits the let's see here, when he hits the hips here, it's right on the hip crease, and the elbow bend stays the same. With 225 pounds on there, that's not light necessarily, especially doing it 30 times for time. That's what he's doing here. The Isabel, so it's called. He's going to do this 30 times in a row as fast as he can. Finish it like under 6 minutes. It's ridiculous. All right. But here he gets into a decent power position. Some people are griping about his heels. They do come up early. All right. I don't know if that's a symptom of his early elbow bend or not, because he does get vertical and he does hit the hips. So in this scenario, I'm not that concerned about the elbow bend. Okay, should he experiment, which I'm sure he did. He's a professional athlete at this point. Sure, he experimented with all kinds of different techniques to see what works for him. Okay, then this and this is the other thing too. If it happens naturally, if it's something you just can't get rid of, and your bar path looks great, and they're not acting like shock absorbers. Because what I mean by shock absorber is when he finishes the hip extension, does his elbow bend change? Does his arm straighten? He needs to keep the same angle all the way through the hip extension. Okay. I must have been talking here and pausing. Let's see, where was I? That's probably what I was explaining at this moment. When he comes through, like here, okay, he finished the hip extension, and you can see the elbow bend is the same. His arms didn't straighten. If you start with a certain elbow bend, once you do bend them, you need to keep that static all the way through the explosion, all the way through the jump. They should not re-lengthen. If they re-lengthen, then your power is being diminished. That's one of the reasons if the elbow bends, the power ends. There's some problems that can arise. Okay, so and one of the comments below, and this and one was because I think I mentioned in the video that Lydia Valentin is a decent example. She's a good example of when elbow bend is acceptable that I could think off the top of my head when I was doing this video. I'm sure there's even better examples because hers is there, but it's very slight. And I got challenged here. Lydia Valentin never bends her elbows. So I checked it out. I was like, I could be wrong. But if you check this clean, all right, let's slow it down a little bit. There is an elbow bend here. And this is perfect because she's not beyond the 10-degree mark by any means. She starts out, let's go ahead and, okay, now look at this elbow, how she starts out is very straight. Okay, like when I drew that line earlier, elbow, wrist, shoulder, connected, straight line. The elbow is not off of that line at all. Okay, as we progress, and she starts to rev up into the second pull, okay, it's there. Not like Rich's, but it's there. And you can see it here. Okay, the elbow is off the straight line. All right, and you can see it in the tension in her biceps and her forearms. Okay, and if I had to guess why she likes to do it that way is because it looks like to me she's got long arms and a short torso, from what I can see in the videos. If we measured her, we might find that. Might not. Okay. So she's trying to get that bar up into the hip crease, and at these heavy weights, these world class elite weights, it also looks like she struggles to get a good scapular retraction and a shrug. So that might be how she compensates. She bends the elbow just slightly, okay, to get it into the hips, where she just barely makes it. I mean, that's upper thigh, hip crease. Any lower, it's upper thigh. It's only upper thigh. All right, and notice how her shoulders start out kind of forward. It's not the most exaggerated scapular retraction I've ever seen. Looks a little rounded and doesn't really change. It still looks somewhat rounded, and I don't blame her. It's super heavy weight. All right, so on this heavy weight, she's going to activate a little bit of bicep right there. It's not huge, but it's there to get it into the hip crease. Compared to down here, and if I had to be honest, I thought it was way more. I did. So people who don't think that's an elbow bend, I can understand that. it's hard to see. It's not exaggerated at all. Okay, so just remember this. Your elbow bend might not be in error if you look like her. And I would put Rich on the very extreme end. Okay? I guess I gotta back up. On the very extreme end. Okay? I think he's pushing the limits there. But he snatches almost more than anybody in his sport of CrossFit. And he also snatches and clean and jerks enough. He has a high enough total, especially now, especially later in his career. This was kind of early, to be on a national team. His numbers are way into the 99th percentile. He's in the top 1% for his weight class in the world. Okay, so if it's hurting his performance, it's very hard to say. Very hard to say. Okay, so remember those two things. If your arm bend is screwing up your bar path, you need to look at it. If your arms are acting like shock absorbers, they're going up and down throughout the whole lift, they're not static, then you need to take measures to fix it.